Good morning. It's Eurovision week. Today is the day of the Eurovision Song Contest semi-final 1. We've seen a rehearsal last night at the dress rehearsal for the first semi-final, so we now have an idea of the overall feel of the show, as well as the hosting, the postcards, the stagings of the different songs. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about my general impressions, as well as which songs I think are going to be qualifying for the first semi-final. So to start on the positives, I would say the most impressive feat this year would be the stage. I did have some concerns when they revealed the design and it had that big kind of window at the front, but I think that the majority of acts use the stage quite well. I would also say that some of the best looking acts are the ones that kind of make the stage disappear, but for what they have provided technically, I think that it still has provided a lot of the delegations with enough at their disposal to make for interesting television. When it comes to other factors that I would say are positive, it's hard to think of anything that's like remarkable, because I feel like a lot of the elements of the show are very similar to elements that we've seen in previous editions of Eurovision. And while I don't necessarily think that that's bad, I don't think that there are quite as many unique features that make Basel stand out from what we've seen so far. One thing that comes to mind are the postcards. From a technical point of view, it's more or less what we expect to see from postcards in the last few years, but the main feeling that I got was that they are very similar to the ones from Vienna. They start with the act opening a post box and reaching in for a letter, and then they're transported to a new location. So it just all feels quite familiar. Not that it's necessarily going to matter to the general audience, but from a uniqueness point of view, not a lot there, I would say. Another factor that's not really sitting so well with me would be the hosting. It's quite stiff, and I wonder if that is more to do with the script itself than the actual talent, although I also don't think that the talent is very comfortable at this point. There was one moment where Hazel had kind of fumbled on a word and dropped the script to, acknowledge it and roll with the punches, and that I think was actually the most entertaining moment. The rest of it was not only stiff, but also quite cheesy, and I feel like the overall feeling that I got from the show was more cheese than what you would expect from Eurovision, which I don't think bodes well at this point. If you want an example, there's one point where they're talking about the top 3 Swiss songs of all time, and it ends with the chicken dance, and they play it, and everybody in the audience is supposed to, flap along, whatever. Feels very much like children's television. Throughout the show, we get a number of callbacks to older songs through little mini compilations. Not quite the same way that we did last year, where they had integrated those into the postcards. And a lot of it just feels like filler. If you are watching in a country where they play commercial breaks during those moments, you won't be seeing that, probably for good reason, because that's kind of where things really start to feel quite cheesy. They also have a kind of musical review interval act after all the performances have finished. Feels very much like trying to do what Sweden's doing, and there is a notable cameo in that, which maybe you might already know who it is, but I'll leave it a secret so that not everything is spoiled. Definitely a downgrade from some of the musical reviews that we've seen last year, which is definitely an area that SVT has really excelled at. This just really feels like they're trying to do something like that and not at all succeeding. Now, one question that a lot of people have had since last year is, will we be seeing Celine Dion? The answer is yes, but it's through a video message. I don't think anybody's really surprised about that given the circumstances. So she sends a message, and then after that, we get a performance of Ne partez pas sans moi, which is her winning song from 1988, performed by 4 of the acts from previous Eurovision editions that have been announced. Again, I'll kind of leave that in, if you don't already know, I'll leave that as a surprise, because there are quite a few who have confirmed that they'll be appearing throughout the week. When it comes to the reveal of the results, 2 notable things to mention. Firstly, we don't hear anything from Martin Osterdahl. He does appear on camera in what I think is a closed environment as well, and gives a thumbs up. We know why they're doing that. I don't know, I guess just kind of an example of where Eurovision's at right now. And then finally, another thing that's been a pretty major development this year is a new way of revealing the qualifiers. What they do is they have 3 of the acts on screen, and they announce one of them as a qualifier. Apparently, no act will appear more than 3 times. And then when it comes down, when they've made 9 qualifier announcements and they're calling the last one, then everybody appears on screen, all the remaining non-qualifiers, and they call for the last qualifier, and then that's that. Now, some people are a bit concerned about how much attention this puts on acts that will eventually non-qualify and whether or not we'll be kind of seeing their mental anguish as that happens. And I think that's a valid point. What I think is being overlooked here is that when it comes to how the production operates, they've always kind of sent the cameras to go to different locations and not necessarily with the interest of highlighting the one act that will qualify, because then otherwise it would be obvious. So the way that I see it is that they are simply making use of having those cameras in their place and just putting it through to the actual program feed onto, into the broadcast, rather than just keeping it a secret and using a few shots here and there before the announcement. Whether or not this is more exciting, I can't really say. With the people that I was watching the show with last night, the overall feeling was that it just makes the process feel longer, which in my mind works against the excitement. And yeah, not even in like a building anticipation way. It just feels like the process is more drawn out. I don't think there was much wrong with how things were being done before. Whether or not they're going to stick this for this year and then just see what the response from the general audience is, I would assume that's going to be the case. In 2023, they also tried something where they brought all of the semi-finalists on stage and, pointed the cameras at them that way, and then that ended up getting scrapped after the first rehearsal. That hasn't happened this time, so I imagine that they're going to be sticking with this. But yeah, I don't necessarily think it's an improvement, but it's not like a substantial downgrade. So with that said, let's talk about who's actually performing in this semi-final. I do want to say that there was one act that we saw that truly blew everything out of the water. I'll make mention of it when it comes up, but let's talk about qualifiers then. So there are 7 countries here that I think are more or less set for qualification, and I have Poland, Estonia, Ukraine, Sweden, Norway, Albania, and the Netherlands. With Poland, I don't think it's really all that good, apart from being, a good vocal show for Justina. But I think that it's also just kind of ticking certain Eurovision boxes that people will appreciate. And while there were concerns last year about the Polish entry and people like myself even said the diaspora might show up for it anyway, and that didn't happen. In this case, I have a very hard time seeing Poland not qualifying, even if it's not like the most refined or, performance in best taste. I am pretty certain that this is going through. Estonia is very much not my thing. I don't really have much to say about it other than it's, more or less the same antics that we saw in Estilal. There's one addition of, instead of Karya being in the audience, it's some other super fan and they end up doing this stage invader gag. There's a huge fandom behind this. And so for that reason, I don't see it not qualifying, but yeah, I just can't be bothered myself. Ukraine's performance has some pretty solid moments. I do think that this is another example of when they've maybe done a little bit too much with their staging. There's also this kind of Vaseline on the lens effect. It's a soft focus kind of thing to match the 1970s rock vibe. Vocally speaking, it also had some issues as well. Not a bad performance by any means, but definitely needs some refining. But nonetheless, I think that the strong visual moments will help this stand out. And Ukraine is still putting in something that's meaningful and something that's well composed, at least. With Sweden, I don't think there's a lot more to say. It's very similar to the Melfest performance. The most substantial change that I've noticed was that they have made the lighting a little bit more atmospheric, which is not really what you would expect for this kind of performance, at least when it's staged at Melfest, but it's a nice detail that complements everything around it. When it comes to Norway, there are certain moments where the absence of auto-tune that was used in MGP becomes a little bit more noticeable. At the end of the day, like Poland, I think this is, ticking some boxes for what people want when they watch Eurovision. And for that reason, I think it's going to make it through. Albania, huge fan favorite. Really solid use of the LEDs. In fact, I would say that this is the best use of the LEDs out of all of the performances. One of the concerns for a lot of people has been Cole's moment. Cole's the man who does this spoken word part. In this case, while he is still, maybe a little bit stiff, it's communicated in a bit more of a better way. It seems more intense. And I think that they've refined all the details that have been needed to be refined. Also, Beatrice sounds better than ever. This is a really solid one. And I would like to think that this could win the semifinal, even though I think a lot more people are thinking that it's going to be Sweden because Sweden is, seen as most likely to win. But yeah, I'd like to think that this has a shot. And then the Netherlands is pretty solid all around. The majority of the performance is a long take, kind of like Greece's song from last year, but then eventually they switched to some of the cameras from around. One thing that they did right here that Greece did not do is that they went back to the Steadicam and continued the performance from up close to Claude. So with that, there are 3 songs that I am pretty sure are not qualifying, and they are Slovenia, San Marino, and Croatia. What I will say about Slovenia that I think was an essential addition to this performance was including Clemen's wife, so that it shows that the story behind the song is meaningful and something that's true to his life. And it's that aspect of it that makes me think that this potentially won't be completely dead. I just think that when compared to other things that we're seeing, it has much less of a chance than everything else. Maybe if some of these other songs, if maybe the audience isn't so crazy about the high energy and up-tempo songs that a lot of us are feeling confident about, then something like this could slide through. But I mean, even compared to some of the other slower songs that are in this, I don't think that this one ranks. I don't think this one compares quite as strongly as they do. With San Marino, what I've always believed about this song is that it works better as a jingle than a 3-minute song. What's also not doing it any favors is the fact that this is more or less the typical DJ setup, but with performers that are not only like in all different corners, but are masked as well. And then to add to that, it's a lot of wide shots and very few moments to actually connect with performers. Again, might not be completely dead on arrival because, the song has like a silliness to it that people might vibe with. But what I saw yesterday does not say qualifier at all. And then with Croatia, I would say it's definitely a massive improvement from what we saw at Dora. Dora's performance was completely messy and had very little visual appeal. In this case, they've really elevated it with lighting. Lighting, I think, is like the biggest selling point of this performance. What I think is still working against this one is just conceptually, it's a little bit confusing. Like, a lot of the other songs have a very clear identity, and yet this one is called Poison Cake. It has, this like crazy neon lighting with it. You don't really see much of Marco up close. So yeah, I just don't think there's like a selling point here that's clear apart from, maybe atmosphere. Again, like, I don't think that anything is completely dead on arrival, but these are the 3 that I think have the least possible chances of qualifying. So there are 4 songs that I consider to be kind of on the cusp, and they would be Iceland, Portugal, Belgium, and Cyprus. With Iceland, it's very simple. It's a party song. There's no depth to it. It's like that on purpose. That could be enough for people who are just looking for something to bop along to. I have that it like reads 24th in the final if it were to make it through. I think I'm still leaning more towards it not qualifying, but watching it, I just felt like it is the kind of stupid fun that people could rally behind anyway. Portugal would be in the final if it were up to me. Portugal does elegance very well. I've said that a bunch of times. It is, of course, a much more subtle song. It's indie rock. It's not necessarily the kind of thing that everybody's looking for. That could also be what works in its favor because this semifinal is, Eurovision overall this year is like this, but it, quite loud, quite in your face. And this was kind of a nice moment to breathe. And so my hope is that this could still make it through. I think it's funny that with Portugal, it's always the case now that the juries are not in the semifinals, that we're always having the same discussions. In this case, I think that it's more concerning than ever than the last 2 examples. But I do think that the calmness of this performance could really work well. And definitely for the diaspora because of the message of being away from home. I think that they will really show up for this. With Belgium, I'm leaning much more towards qualifying than not qualifying. My issue with it is that they've overstaged it, in my opinion. You've got moments where there's like a Sebastian on the floor and, there are duplicates around him. I honestly feel like the best presentation of this song was the very first one in the showcase when they were just presenting the songs at Eurosong without people voting on them. And I think that the strength of Sebastian's vocal and the lighting and atmosphere would have been enough to sell this. And now it just seems like they've gone too far. They've put too many elements in it that make it a bit excessive. But again, still leaning more towards qualifying than not. The vocals are still pretty strong, not as strong as we've seen them, but it's an overall remarkable package, and I think that it's going to at least stand out in most people's minds. And then we have Cyprus, which, like Belgium, is tapping into 90s and 2000s Eurodance, but still with a different sound identity. Also been quite a bit of buzz for this one for the inclusion of Sergio Jaén as the staging director. He did Bambi Thug Ireland staging from last year, which blew everything out of the water. The staging is definitely dynamic in some ways, but I don't feel like the kind of scaffolding structure that they're on is really that impressive. It just looks like pieces of a construction site that they kind of picked up and are making use of. There is also a lot of movement on Theo's end. It does affect his ability to sing, I have to say. I am definitely of two minds about this. Definitely not a write-off, but I just don't see it as being as complete and as sound as people might have been hoping. Now, from this list of borderline qualifiers, I'm going to add 2 to the list of qualifiers that I have so that there are 9. The reason why I'm doing 9 and not 10 is because in this semifinal, there's one country that I don't provide coverage of, and if you want to know why, there's a link in the description. So to add to the list of qualifiers, Poland, Estonia, Ukraine, Sweden, Norway, Albania, and the Netherlands, I'm going to include Belgium and Portugal. And truthfully, I could go either way between Portugal and Cyprus, but I'm putting Portugal in because that's the one that I want to believe in. Last but not least, let's talk about the auto qualifiers. In this semi-final, we see performances from Spain, Italy, and our host country, Switzerland. Spain is doing their diva thing. That's really the best I can say about it. What I can say about the visuals is that they've segmented it quite well. There are, different looks. They've kind of, thought about what to include in the frame so that it looks kind of like 3 different scenes. That I thought was pretty smart. The rest of it, she performs it well. There was no question about that. Not for me. It will find its audience, I guess. That's all I can say. Italy has gone for a stripped back performance that's meant to feel like it's, live and real. They've also got subtitles throughout the entire thing, which, helps you understand the context of the song. At the end, we get some live harmonica. He does a little bit of a solo, and that I think is a nice touch. It's probably the standout moment of the entire thing, because for the most part, it's not necessarily the best. It's not best made for television, but I don't think that they were going for that anyway. It is rare that we have a year where there's not a lot of hype around the Italian entry. I just think the nature of the song is not one that, a lot of people think of for Eurovision. This could still surprise because, again, it kind of sets itself apart from everything else. But I do think that more than ever, this one will probably struggle when compared to the, harder hitting Italian acts that we've seen in many of the years before. Last but not least, we have our host, Switzerland. I mentioned earlier that there was one performance that really stood out when compared to everything else, and it was this one. This will be another jury heavyweight. I'm calling it now. Really elegantly done, really dynamic performance, even for the fact that it's a single take. When it starts, she looks like a Rembrandt painting or something, and as the music builds, you get little additions of light. You also get some playing with the focus as she reaches out to the camera and comes back. It is really, really impactful, and I think that this will be a performance that the Swiss will be proud of. So that's about all I can say about this first semi-final. Let me know in the comments what your qualifiers are and what you think of my qualifiers. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to the channel so that we can keep talking about Eurovision and the various developments that happen around the show, and I hope to see you next time. Take care.